Creepy dude in the forest. This is my first post ever, so I apologize for any mistakes or whatsoever in advance. This story is something that happened to my mom when she was about 17 years old. Back then, she lived in a small town in Germany, and she would go on bike tours frequently. This particular day, she wanted to ride the bike to the forest, have a picnic there, and ride back home. She had done that a bunch of times, and it wasn't an unsafe place, and she'd always set up her stuff near the road just in case. Anyways, when she almost got to the spot she'd usually set up at, there was a boy fixing his bike. My mom said he was maybe about 14 years old. My mom wasn't on the bike anymore, she was wheeling it, because she was almost there. When she passed the guy, he jumps up, and the next thing she knows, she's face down on the ground. She instantly started yelling at him, stuff like, "Get away from me, what the fuck are you doing?" He got up and started fumbling with his belt, trying to get his pants open, and my mom just ran away. Her mom didn't call the cops or anything because, well, nothing happened. That isn't all of it, though. Fast forward 4 to 5 years later, a few towns over, the guy is on the news for murder. He would wait for a woman in the parking lot or in the park to kill them, and even stabbed a woman who was pushing her baby around in a stroller. My mom was glad that this happened when he was still younger, because if he had been older, he might have acted differently and ended up dead in the forest. Still freaks me out. Forests. Some background information. I live in the Pacific Northwest in a small town, about an hour from Seattle. Really close to my home is an enormous state forest. For my birthday, my dad suggested we go for a hike in that forest. I was really uneasy at first, because this forest does have somewhat of a history. There's illegal business here, and the majority of it is in that state forest, because it isn't anyone's jurisdiction. Basically, you should hope you aren't spotted as a witness to drug operations or illegal logging. To make matters worse, the forest is used as a dumping ground as well as a remote site to commit murders. The murders don't really exceed one every 3 to 4 years. The ones that happen in the forest are generally drug-related, while the bodies dumped there vary in motive, 2 of which are believed to be victims of Ted Bundy. There is also a minimum security correction center in the south end of the forest. So, on an early spring weekend, I went there for a day hike with my dad. How did this even happen? Well, my dad managed to convince me that there was no danger because no one is already after us for anything. There's no motive and by extension, no reason for alarm. And the forest is giant. The odds are low. Going in the overcast and rainy off-season, we knew there would be no foot or motor traffic, which is nice. We started out in the southeastern portion, walking through the occasional clear cut, but after the first mile, moved into dense forest. There wasn't much to see and it was terribly muddy. I had little to distract me but the sound of my own footsteps. Until I heard other footsteps. The footsteps were loud and deliberate, as a human's would be, but there weren't more hikers. They were coming from the trees above. I wasn't comfortable, but also armed with a hunting knife. I decided it was probably an animal, despite seeing none or even hearing birds. A short while later, I heard low voices. This I could only think, if it don't bother them, they won't bother me, right? So I tried to forget it. I am cursed with incredibly good hearing, though, making it hard to get rid of my suspicions. Walking on, we passed a seemingly still body of water to the left. It was weird. It connected to a creek on both sides, but it was large and unmoving, like a pond. Additionally, there were no life of any kind, no fish, hardly any plants, but brown algae and thick yellow grass. On the right, the forest was ridiculously dense, with a few spur trails that disappear in within a few feet. All of it was a bit weird, but not suspicious. We kept walking to a small waterfall about 100 feet ahead. My dad had become busy taking pictures. I surveyed the area and turned around, looking back at the trail. Then I saw him. In the distance, a tall, lanky man in grungy-looking clothing practically leapt out from the side of the trail with the pond and in another bound across the trail into the trees on the other side. I assumed he continued down a spur trail to who knows where. It was so quick that I didn't even react. I saw him and he was gone into the trees. My dad decided we should head back after taking a sufficient amount of pictures. As we headed down, there was a small organized pile of fern leaves in the center of the trail, pointed in the direction we were heading. My dad didn't know what to make of it, because we didn't see anyone on the trail that day. Well, he didn't. Flashbulb Forest Creeper. 6 encounters. Disclaimer: I still have no idea what happened here, and fully welcome any ideas about what this could be about. It has completely mystified my family and I, and we're trying to keep it out of our minds. I've told this story to my friends many different times, and it's nice to get it all written down. It's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me without a doubt. Note: this story is split into 6 different encounters. You can skip between them if you want, but they were each technically isolated incidents. Again, I apologize for the length, but 6 different encounters requires 6 different accounts, and for all I know, it could be the same guy. I honestly contemplated pulling this in a different sub, because a lot of people would attribute this to paranormal bullshit or something of that sort. I don't believe in that. And I think that it would be comforting, actually, if I were to write this off, especially the 6th encounter, as a ghost or aliens or something. I think this was a person, and I have absolutely no idea what they wanted or what they were doing, but I think that someone was outside, and I'm still terrified that they'll come back. Backstory: my parents own a cabin up in the foothills of a mountainous forested region in the Pacific Northwest. It's about 20 minutes from the nearest town, and is on an old Forest Service road that's unpaved and poorly maintained. It's near a highway, but pretty far back in the trees. Essentially, it's in the middle of nowhere, and while we have neighbors on either side, their cabins are very far away from ours, and they're almost never up. This time, neither of them were there. We get a lot of creeps up around that area. A lot of escaped convicts like to camp out up the road. Our road stretches on for miles and becomes impossible to drive on very quickly. It eventually leads to a giant abandoned rock quarry, which is where most of the criminals hang out. We know they're criminals because we get a lot of forest rangers asking us questions and going up the road to try and find them. And just recently, they put up these huge mounds of dirt and have felled a few trees to make the road impossible to drive up at all. They were very adamant about keeping people out of there. The backstory is important here, as again, I don't know what this was, and it could have easily been one of these creeps. Numerous cabins in that area have been broken into, and there's a lot of weird crimes that happen up there, most likely from the convicts. Lots of gunfire, like every other day there's gunfire. Usually shotguns, some rifles. Hunting is outlawed up there, so there aren't many hunters. One time, a family down the road came into their cabin to find 3 guys had been fucking living in it. The guys ran when they saw the owner's car pulling up, and the inside was absolutely trashed and smashed, and the guys had literally shat everywhere. Gross. First encounter. I was about 8. This could be unrelated to the next 2 encounters, and I assume it was just one of the ex-cons trying to rob us, but it's still scary. We used to stay at my grandma's cabin down the road before we bought our own, and one night we were woken up at night by strange scruffling noises outside. We get bears scrounging around quite often, and sometimes they'll root around and look for garbage, so we assumed that's what it was. The next morning, we found evidence that someone had tried to crowbar our back door open. Luckily, we deadbolt it, and have this giant metal bar that we used to bolt it closed at night. Whoever it had managed to crowbar their way through the locked door, I guess we slept through this part, or this was right before we woke up, I don't know. Only to find it was barred from the inside. I guess he gave up and left. It freaked us out and we reinforced our doors further. Second encounter, I was about 13. Two Jehovah's Witnesses showed up at our door. This would normally not be a big deal, but we were pretty freaked out. Why? Because we lived 20 minutes away from the nearest village. By village, I mean essentially a highway rest stop area with grocery store, movie rentals, ski rentals, and 3 restaurants. We're a good 40 minutes away from the nearest town and an hour and a half away from the nearest city, and for some reason, there's 2 Jehovah Witnesses in the middle of the fucking forest without a car? I know this might be an overreaction, but I cannot stress enough that we were absolutely isolated. Most people don't know our road even exists. It's totally hidden from view on the highway, so they asked to come in and pray with us, and my parents say no, tell them to go away, and then call the police. Third encounter, I was about 14. This was when shit started to get really weird. My parents bought their own cabin down the road so we wouldn't have to burden my grandma whenever we wanted to be up in the forest. We have 2 large black labs, by the way. They're very good guard dogs and don't bark unless there's something legitimately out there. I know that. Well, one of them will bark at stupid shit, but his older brother only barks when he sees a human being coming towards our house or who looks or is acting very threatening. It was about 3 a.m. I was asleep, so were my parents. Suddenly, we get woken up very quickly by 3 loud bangs at the door, like someone was fucking pounding on the door. Our dogs are freaking out, like they're barking in the most threatening, "Get the fuck out of here or I will maul you" way. They were definitely very alarmed. I looked over to my parents' bed, and both of them are sitting bolt upright, looking terrified. I shout over my dogs, "Did you hear that?" And my mom doesn't say anything. She just grabs the shotgun and runs down to the bathroom window. That's our procedure for intruders, looking through the bathroom window at the front door, because then we're behind the person and they don't see us, and we can get the shotgun pointed at them before they have a chance to point one at us. We're not really rednecks at all, I promise. We live in the middle of the city, but when you're in a cabin in the middle of the woods with a bunch of gun-toting ex-cons, you have to be armed and assume the worst. Also, in case you're gonna say we should have called the cops, I repeat, we are in the middle of the forest. One time our alarm was triggered because a squirrel tripped the motion sensor, and it took the cops 45 minutes to reach our cabin. We timed it. We have to take care of ourselves in emergency situations. I went down with my mom and looked out the window. Nobody was out there. Not anybody running off into the distance, nothing. I should also mention that the land around our cabin is covered in very thick underbrush that is very, very loud. You cannot run away in thick underbrush without making a sound. We didn't hear anyone running away, but it's possible that the dogs scared them off, and we didn't hear over the barking. I checked with my parents, and they heard the same thing, exact same thing. 3 very loud, urgent, distinct bangs at the front door that were undeniably knocks. It wasn't like an animal was scratching at our door, like it was a bang, 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 and there was no mistaking it. Definitely a knock. I have no idea where the person went. Fourth encounter. I was 14. We came up to the cabin after being gone for a week. It had snowed overnight, and it was still somewhat snowing hard. There were footprints in the snow leading all the way around our cabin, and whoever had made them had stopped at every single fucking window to try and look inside. The creepy thing about this was that it had snowed that night. Whoever made those footprints had to have made them at most an hour before we got there, because it was still snowing and they were very fresh. We literally just missed whoever it was. It might have just been a neighbor or something, but I have no idea. But the footprints came in from the road, not just from the neighboring cabins. We tried to track them, but I think we had driven over the ones on the road when we drove in. That, or the person got into a car on the road and drove off. There were fresh tire tracks on the road as well, but that's not that unusual. Fifth encounter, I was still 14. This is very short, but it scared us. We have an old truck that we leave up there while we're gone to make it look like we're still in the cabin. One time when we came up, we saw that the door had been crowbarred again. What was really scary though was that all the tires on the truck had been slashed. I mean, it was obviously slashed. There were huge gashes in all 4 tires that weren't there the last time we were up. This still freaks me the fuck out because it means whoever tried to break in probably thought that we were home and slashed the tires to prevent us from driving away. If you don't have a car up there, you're absolutely stranded, and you'd have to run a long way to get help. Did I mention that there's no cell service up there? If someone cuts our phone line, we would be 100% unable to call for help. I'm serious, that cabin is beautiful, but it's the stuff of fucking horror movies. Sixth encounter, I was 16. This is the scariest encounter. This is the one I want help with. Does anyone know what this could have been? I'm absolutely mystified by it. It was 2 a.m. I remember specifically. I was lying awake in bed browsing the internet and my parents were asleep. My dogs were also asleep. I had the window by my bed open to hear the sound of the creek that runs near our cabin. I should also mention that the bedrooms are on the second floor, thank God. As I'm browsing around, I hear something crunching through the underbrush outside our cabin again. You can hear everything outside because the underbrush is so goddamn loud. I mean, I assume it's an animal or something. We get deers, bears, cougars, and other large beasties outside our cabin pretty frequently. I ignored it and went back to browsing. Then I saw something so simple but so terrifying that it made my heart skip a beat. A giant white flash, like a flashbulb going off. My jaw literally dropped. There was no way an animal could have gotten a hold of something that would create a blinding white flash like that. Thinking I might have just hallucinated it or something, I tried to brush it off, but then it happened again. Another bright flash, and it lit up the trees around my cabin. To clarify, it was a perfectly clear night in the middle of the summer. We don't get thunderstorms up there very often, and when we do, they're loud and torrential. There's absolutely no way this was lightning. Also, it clicked. Every single time the flash happened, I heard a click, like someone with a camera. There were about 10 flashes in total. The first one was about 30 seconds before the second one, and then they were about 5 seconds apart. I was absolutely terrified the entire time, and didn't want to get out of bed because that would mean being in full view of the window, and I didn't want to be seen. Thank God my bedroom is on the second floor, because the curtains were open on the first, and yeah, I waited for 2 hours after the flashes stopped, then decided it was safe to move. Again, no cell reception, so I couldn't reach a phone or text my parents or call 911 without being visible through the window. I told my parents and they called the police again. Nothing they could do, probably imagined it. Maybe a light bulb blew. No evidence. The scariest fucking part of this whole nightmare, and the thing that still makes me nauseated to even think about. I've never heard footsteps going away from the cabin after the flashes, and I was awake and alert and staring straight ahead listening for them for 2 hours. They either hid there until I went to sleep, or there's some sort of phantom that can float above the underbrush at will. I'm putting money on the most realistic but terrifying option. They fucking stayed there until I left to tell my parents. Does anyone know what the forest creeper might have been doing, taking pictures of the house? Why? Neither me nor my parents would have been visible in the pictures. Why go through all that trouble at 2 a.m.? Any other ideas as to what the flashes could have been? I have no idea what happened on that night, and I never had any weird encounters again after that. We still go up to the cabin every weekend, and nothing weird has happened since. It's been 3 years. Thank you for your help. And sorry this was so long.